And so if you're going back and forth over MPT, if it was Frac's fault or if it was wirelines or another third parties, and you've got this kind of like competing timelines of what we logged versus what wireline will log versus what somebody else logged, then it becomes and the operator what they logged. You've got 3 or 4 different time sets that you're kind of arguing about.
Lee, what's your name backwards?
Eel.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
That's actually a long-standing nickname from high school that I had some buddies call me.
Yeah.
Like Eel. Eel is here. The other one was always Mophead because I had longer hair.
Yep.
but Eel was one that stuck.
I get Mophead with the longer hair, but I don't quite get Eel.
It was just, I think it was just because it was just so simple, like Lee backwards.
Yeah.
And they were like, hey, Eel. And I just, I still get called that by some of my buddies.
That's cool. I got Nora. That's Aaron backwards.
I'll take Eel.
Yeah. No, I think Eel is much, much better. Hey, so Lee, if you wouldn't mind, how long have you been with Cold Bore right now?
Oh, shoot. 3.5 years now.
Yeah. And how did your story get started here?
So in 2019, I had left Weatherford, went to a smaller company, didn't pan out the way we had wanted to over there. And so I was kind of looking, came across Cold Bore, I think on LinkedIn maybe.
Yeah. What stood out? Like how did it kind of get you to stop scrolling and just capture your attention?
First and foremost, I needed a job.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, yeah, get it.
And second, just kind of reading about it was all kind of in my wheelhouse for my background.
Yep. Because you came from the frac side, right?
I came from the frac side from Weatherford. And then I, sent my resume, did all the good stuff that you're supposed to do there. And kind of a funny story, I was at the Woodlands Frac Conference, SBE in the Woodlands in 2019. The last one before COVID shut it down the next year. And I get a phone call from, I think, a Calgary number. And
area code 403.
Yeah, it really threw me for a loop. And it was Daphne.
Yep.
And she was like, hey, I'm trying to see if you can meet Brett tomorrow. I've sent you an email, but you never responded.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I didn't get an email. And I looked and it was in the junk folder.
Yep.
She sent it a few days before. So scrambled, got home, got a good night's rest, and then went and interviewed with Brett the next day.
Yep. So where did you guys do the interview?
Some hotel downtown in Houston. He's pretty bougie, so he had to stay at a good place.
Yeah, of course. I think he was living downtown at the time, probably.
I don't know if he was living here. No, he definitely wasn't living here then.
Okay, that was maybe post-COVID.
Yeah, it was post-COVID.
Okay, all right. So your interview. So here's the thing. So not everyone has met Brett, but maybe they've seen him on the videos. Brett is probably not your typical oil and gas executive. Definitely not.
I walked in. Your typical resume. Interview gear, wear. Suited up, looking sharp. And, he's sitting there, tats everywhere and just relaxed. And, I was like, cool, we're going to do this. And we did it just right in the lobby of the hotel.
Yep.
Like people walking by, we're just sitting there having a conversation.
So, well, thinking back about 3.5 years ago, so because Cold Bore, the product offering has evolved and things have gotten better, more sophisticated. What was happening at that point? What was the product? What was the opportunity of the product that got you so kind of interested or excited? Especially considering your background in frac.
Just the sheer amount of data that we were getting at that point, the time log, the timestamp. And referencing it back to my experience, that was something that we had kind of skirted around a little bit at Weatherford back in the day.
Yeah.
Especially when you had what we called integrated projects where you had, our frac crew and then a Weatherford wireline company out there and trying to establish the proper timeline for MPT tracking and things like that.
Yep.
Very human intensive. It was very manual process. There wasn't, there was a level of accuracy, but it was not near what we have even 3 years ago versus today.
What were disputes like? Did you experience disputes at Weatherford?
Was that sure,
a thing.
It was typically MPT stuff, or if frac was shut down and it impacted wireline, then who was responsible for any MPT? Because it was an integrated project. It was Weatherford was, but you got two competing product lines, or not competing, but you got two different product lines that are out there. And then if you had a different wireline company and still trying to do some pad timelines was just kind of a futile effort, right?
Why would you want to, or what was the goal to try to aggregate, kind of all of this data and get it together? Like from your perspective, from a frac, running a frac job, how were you guys looking at it outside of being able to, maybe deal with potential disputes? Like I imagine you guys were probably trying to optimize your job in some way.
Optimize the job. Absolutely. Try to, get more efficient, pump more hours in the day, more days in the month. And then secondly, like, your, day sales outstanding, how quickly can you get your invoices in? How quickly can you get them approved to figure out how quickly you can get paid? That was a pretty, substantive effort to try to like draw those draw those days down as much as possible. And so if you're going back and forth over MPT, if it was Frac's fault or if it was Wireline's or another third parties, and you've got this kind of like competing timelines of what we logged versus what Wireline will log versus what somebody else logged, then it becomes and the operator what they logged. You've got 3 or 4 different time sets that you're kind of arguing about, and sometimes those are minor numbers, and it's like everybody's good.
The different timestamps, even though it seems like a very simple thing, but this is an actual, this is a significant challenge. Like there are different timestamps, like creating that universal timestamp, which is what SmartPAD is bringing to the industry. That has been a huge challenge up until now.
Absolutely. And, like I said, when it came down to like just invoicing and the back and forth over those, trying to figure out, who was responsible for what downtime or anything like that. Those could be really quick kind of negotiations with your client, or they could, expand into, 1 week, 2 week, 3 weeks, 4. And then all of a sudden, those are days that you haven't actually invoiced. And so you haven't gotten paid. So when you look at it, and this was also, a lot of those disputes were coming up in, the downturn of like 15, 16, that time frame. And so you might have a 90-day pay, and for every, you don't get that clock started until you get your invoice in.
Yep.
And then if there's a dispute attached on that, then you might push that 90 days out even further. And so that's money that's not coming in on your cash flow. And so it was really a challenge for the districts to try to make sure your tickets were accurate, make sure, all your times were accurate and everything else. But there was still that human element that was not definitive.
Yeah.
And so everybody, you would put forth good effort with everybody on site, but the operator may have a different timeline versus what Frac versus Wireline and so forth.
From what I understand, so cold bore, there's a number of deployments with a lot of the super majors. And I was just wondering, can you maybe speak to how have some of those opportunities transpired? Because obviously there's going to be a long opportunity to have some conversations with a lot of different groups. And then you're going to get hopefully an opportunity to maybe test and prove out the technology. And then there's an opportunity, when I'm assuming that a lot of these are very positive, to move through and create some of those deployments. And when you're working with some of the companies of this kind of scale, that is a big deal. And that probably causes some challenges to be able to deploy at that level. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, so when you look at some of these companies, we treat, whether they're big or small, we treat them all the same.
Yeah.
Each one of them has their own unique set of challenges. And so, that's one thing that I've always pushed, and Brett and everybody else, is it doesn't matter how big or how small, you're still going to get the same level of service.
Yep.
Although they may be slightly varying in the departments we have to speak to.
Yeah.
And so when you go to some of the majors, the super majors, the bigger companies, they've got, dedicated IT, dedicated, data teams, and then you've got your operations teams. And so what we have to do is we don't just meet with the operational group, we'll meet with the data group and make sure that we're satisfying any need that they have or where they want the data sent. And then, same with IT. And then the operational group is more of the functionality, right?
Yep.
It's what are we paying for, and how is this going to benefit my operation?
Yep.
Because some of them, data is over there. We'll just let them worry about that. I just want to know how I'm going to make this job great and the next job better.
So, okay. So how do you answer some of those questions? So how is that going to make their life better? So let's maybe talk on an operational standpoint. What's the conversation in that situation?
So a lot of it is initially finding out how they currently run their jobs, right? Where are their pain points? Like, are they, having pain points and visibility from the field? Because that's, the low hanging fruit, right?
Yep.
The real time monitoring, real time views, stuff like that.
Yep.
And then what are they wanting to glean from the data that's at their fingertips right away?
Yep.
From within our dashboard, and walking them through the different use cases where we've had, whether it's the frac tree monitoring and able to view the valves in real time. Whether it's on site or whether they're remote. Yeah. And going through and just really trying to find out, because when you start talking to these guys, generally, almost 100% of the time, they've got pain points that they have not been fixed yet. Mm-hmm. And so what we want to do is come in and, as a partner and a trusted partner, is figure out how to make their life easier.
Yep.
And some of that could be like, we've got Pad in Your Pocket, our mobile app. being able to free them up to be able to go out and maybe go to a kid's football game and still have visibility of their pad.
You don't have to be chained to your laptop or your desktop or something like that. In case you get that phone call, you got to be able to see it.
To quickly triage and just take a look and be like, okay, I know what's going on.
Yep.
A lot of guys before had to, cart a laptop with them.
Yep.
And it, the ability to have this at your fingertips in real time, that's like a pain point that it's a convenience pain point, right? It's something they just lived with.
Yep.
And it's like, and then they start using it and it's like, man, that really resolved this kind of like issue that I had of just being able to untether.
Yep.
And actually, be there for my kids or be there for my wife.
Yep.
Or husband, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
That's one pain point. It's just the ease of use. The other is they start getting more involved in it. And I've got customers, big or small, that, it's up on their monitors, when they're in the office 24/7.
Yeah.
And they're able to just quickly look and assess. Or if they're walking down the hallway, being able to, explain to their bosses where we're at on the frac.
So it probably then, I guess, being able to make sure that this data is available and it's available on site, it's available downtown somewhere, wherever they're located. It probably really does speed up a lot of communication, real-time updates of what's actually going on in the job. How does it help on just the general optimizing a job at the end of the day?
Yep. Well, so when you start looking at it, you can actually notice trends before they become a trend. Like typically how it used to be, if you were having, pump issues, it was like, okay, this is one day issue. And then all of a sudden the next day it's a pump issue, the next day it's the next day. And then you're like, okay, crap, we've got an issue. We've got to have this solved. And then it's a phone call to their frac service provider. We've got pump issues.
Yep.
And now what you're able to see is because you're able to monitor it remotely, you're not just, your guys in the field aren't the only ones that are noticing a problem. You are also able to be on top of it and be like, okay, we've had 2 stages where we've lost 3 pumps. Or we've shut down. We're taking 2 hours between stages instead of the 30 minutes we're supposed to. What's going on out there? And, when you let these lingering problems linger, they become significant problems down the road. And so when you have all this data and you're able to have kind of an above the board conversation with all your partners on site, because that's truly what all the service companies are with the operators now. Yep. It's no longer a vendor, client type relationship. It's more of a partnership because these jobs are becoming so dynamic and they have to be.
Yeah.
And so then you're able to have a much more kind of like above board educated conversation about the problems that you're seeing on site and then how you can help them to kind of resolve those problems before they become much more dynamic.
Yep.
And so each piece of equipment, whether you're tracking MPT, that's easy to optimize because you're tracking it and you see what's happening. You know how to fix it at that point.
Yep.
Before it was a little bit of not blindly, but your company reps on site were relaying some information and you were getting reports post and they'd be in an email.
Yep.
And you'd have to go and seek out that information.
Yep.
And now with what we're doing, that information is right at your fingertips whenever you want to see it.
Yep.
Like whether it's stage reporting, whether it's, the real-time job, whether it's your, valve monitoring, whether it's watching wireline, whatever it is, it's right there that you can go, I want this answer. I want it now.
Yep.
Instead of let me go dig through 50 emails from the last 3 days and compile my report.
Way more responsive.
Very responsive. We got, some of our clients are using our system not solely, but one of the main reasons or one of the big uses of it is being able to compile their morning reports the same way every time.
Yep. So a standardization.
Standardization for what they talk about in their morning ops call before they do their shift change. Yep. And then in the evening, they're doing the same thing.
Yep.
It's all just routine at that point.
My understanding is there's a wide variety of people that you work with at Colt Bore. Are we seeing, so let's say when it comes to maybe smaller boutique style operators versus super majors, do they utilize the tool in different ways? Can you maybe just kind of give some examples of maybe the diversity of how the tool is being deployed?
Yeah, and some of the, smaller operators, the kind of the boutique operators, they may not have like the big data teams in the background that are building them, specific internal dashboards.
Yep.
And so the team that we've built here, we've got specialists, on the Power BI side and other various things that we can build those kind of like useful tools for them and just kind of hand it to them. And they've got this, dashboard template that they can do some more cutting and dicing of the data than what we're doing on the dashboard today.
Yep.
And then some of the more bigger operators have got, some very robust data teams. They just want to have a pipeline to the data.
Okay.
And so they built some stuff that we can just push the data straight into them and they build it however they want. And so It really kind of varies, and our guys are there to kind of consult and assist in any of that, how they want to view it.
Yep.
Right. Because depending upon how big they are, they may want to look at, some basin to basin type comparisons.
Yep.
Where other operators are just singularly in one basin.
So back when you were at Weatherford, the concept of these like real-time centers, is this something that was being kind of thought of back then? Is this actually kind of a newer concept right now?
You had some operators that dabbled in it, I think, back then. There was a lot of struggles. I mean, and there's still, I think, some operators who are trying to do some stuff with it today, but WebEx was a big thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you were constrained with, some, it was high quality then, but low quality, satellites on location trying to push real time, just share a screen.
Yep.
And so, when I was starting in the field, it was always like, make sure you share your screen and you send out the invites for the WebEx invite.
Yeah.
The problem with that is, you had an intermittent internet back then out in the middle of nowhere. And the other was, if somebody just failed to send the invite
Yep.
or open up WebEx, then the phone calls would come into the data van. Hey, it's 2:00 in the morning. I want to watch the job. Can you send me the invite?
Yeah.
And so they're having to go and open up WebEx and all that. You didn't have a lot of ability you had zero ability to alter the way you viewed it. Mm-hmm. So you'd get another phone call. Hey, can you change the parameters here and here? Can you do this screen? Can you do that? And so that was a lot of challenges in trying to do anything. And the delay was significant in trying to call a job.
Yep.
Remote with WebEx.
So there was always a desire for people offsite wanting to be very involved in what's going on with the job, paying attention to what's going on in the job, but just not getting data in the way they want as quick as they want. And so it seems like that there has been a trend to wanting to be able to create these centers where they can literally just have all of the data coming in at any given time on the jobs that are running, and literally have their teams being able to watch the job and just track what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember, when FaceTime became a big deal, like if we had cell service on location, I would call one of my engineers and be like, hey, can you FaceTime me so I can see what's going on?
Sounds like a big enterprise solution, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it was like, so one of the engineers was standing in front of the computer with a cell phone just so I could view the screen.
Yep.
And be able to talk to the engineer that's in Houston.
Yep.
And it was not the way you want to run these, $1 million jobs by just trusting that you can have cell service to FaceTime somebody from a data van.
But it was a good workaround for a problem.
It was a workaround. It was a, for a short-term issue.
Yep.
It was a decent workaround. WebEx is the same, right? Like we worked with what we had at the time. And, we were talking, yesterday about, I had an engineer that would have to cart his laptop to a Christmas party.
Yeah.
Just because it was a high profile well, there was some high pressure that was going to be happening, and he had to be ready to take a phone call if it came.
Yep.
But we talked, and one of the biggest problems was I was like, man, if we get to that high pressure and you're trying to call it on WebEx, that's like a 12-second, 15-second delay.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah. He was like, that's a good point. He was like, so we'll just have to be on the phone the whole time and you'll have to update me on certain things when this stage arises.
Yeah.
And then that was like, trying to make a determination if you just call the stage, if you keep pumping it, take a risk, whatever.
Yeah.
And it just, so you look back and that was 9 years ago, and you look at the technology, the way it's changed, and being able to embrace it the way we have and offer these tools now, it's just a completely way of doing things.
Yeah.
You can be much more efficient and optimize everything way easier than you could then.
Is there an opportunity that with having all the standardized data that SmartPAD's creating a level of visibility into a job, but also giving you a better ability to trust the data? Are we seeing more of an opportunity to create more of a standardization just around how the frac jobs are actually done on the day? Like, is there an opportunity that once you start to dial in exactly how something can be done, you almost get an opportunity to turn it into more of a repeatable process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with that so you do have some variability with your on-site guys who are calling the jobs, right? You're always going to have, it's a human nature you'll have somebody who may be a little bit more aggressive in pushing rate, or a little bit more aggressive in some of their chemicals, or a little bit more relaxed in one regard or the other.
Yeah.
I've got a customer right now, or a client right now, that's trying to get some more standardization in how his guys are calling each individual stage.
Yeah.
And just looking back at it, not from a tattletale, not from a disciplinary or crack the whip type perspective, but more of a, hey, like, we just want standardization for costing. If I want all my guys calling it the same way, using roughly the same amount of chemicals in the same scenario, as opposed to somebody who's like, oh, well, just throw some more chemical at it or more FR, or we could go more rate, but we don't really need to. And so when you can standardize those human kind of decision making,
taking the guesswork out of it a little bit, you're creating more of a here's the plan based on all the data that we've got.
Yep. Here's the plan. Let's not be so random in how we do it, but a little bit more standardized. And that way they can, their costs, their daily costs can be a little bit more standardized. So in the last few years, have you had a customer who's utilized the data coming in from SmartPAD in an unusual way or an interesting way? Like, have you been kind of surprised at how customers are actually taking advantage of the tool? I think probably the most random, and I love this one, but I was talking to a company rep for one of our clients and, just asked them, kind of a random question. I was like, how are you using this on a daily? And these guys work shifts, or like rotations. So it might be, 2 weeks on, 1 week off, whatever their case is. And he goes, you know what the most random way I use it? And I was like, no, how? And he goes, I figure out how I'm going to buy my groceries. Okay. And I was like, whoa, okay, explain. And he goes, well, if I'm coming in, I log into SmartPAD like a day or two before, and I can see how far along in the well we are, how far along in the job. Is it going good or is it going bad? What is my mindset when I come in? Am I walking into a situation where the crews are crushing it and everything's running smoothly? Or am I walking into something where there's tremendous issues and it's going to be, okay, we've got to come in and try to get this going back in the right direction. Yep. And then on the grocery side of things, he goes, am I going to be out there for 4 days or 7 before we move to the next pad? Yep. And so he goes, I might only buy 5 days worth of groceries, so I have less to move over. Or I might buy 10 because it's going really crappy and I've got at least 7 to 10 days left. Okay, well, this is an interesting piece because I'm just thinking that, and maybe this affects larger operators maybe differently, but just thinking about all of the resources that are deployed on some of these larger jobs, there's a lot of complexity just around the logistics, right? And trying to forecast when are we going to be able to deploy assets from one job to another job. We're probably seeing an opportunity that this data is allowing you to maybe project when are we going to complete a job potentially and get an idea for when are we freeing up a fleet, when are we able to move to a different job? Yep, absolutely. So, I mean, take just sand logistics, for instance. Yep. That's a big one. We're talking to some of the, sand storage people on location, sand storage service companies all the time. One of the big things on trucking is demerge. Too many trucks on location, you're running up the bill. Not enough trucks on location, you're running out of sand. Yeah. That all comes like a human calling, dispatch and be like, hey, slow the trucks down, frac's down for a couple hours. Yep. How do we get that to be a little bit more effective and a little bit more on the money as opposed to just somebody's opinion? Yep. And that comes from like the real-time MPT and stuff like that, where you can kind of level load the trucks at that point. Yep. If you're running, your frac crew's crushing it, you're knocking stages out left and right, maybe you need to add more trucks to the push. Yep. To make sure that you're at full capacity every time. Yeah. And if there's struggles on location, pressure, wireline gets stuck in the hole, water transfers down, all of a sudden those trucks pull back and you kind of limit the cost, stage over stage, right? Yep. Instead of paying off that standby for the truckers, you're actually paying only for the deliveries. So who is really the ideal customer for a SmartPAD deployment at the end of the day? Man, that's a good question. It's somebody who's really wanting to focus on keying in their operation and making data-driven decisions. Yep. And being able to take the data and use it in a manner that's going to help them improve their current operation, but also future operations, right? Yep. And then the more kind of the ones that are more forward thinking and innovative is like, how can we take this data and couple it with production data? Yep. And then circle it back to drilling so that you're optimizing the entire cycle. Because right now you've always had great data on drilling. Yep. And you've had really good data on production. Yep. The kind of black hole has always been completions. Yep. And it was not too long ago the data was transferred for completions on a thumb drive. Oh. And I remember when I first got in the field, we were burning CDs. Yeah. If you ever tried to burn a CD in a dusty field data van, good luck, because there's grime and dust and everything. Probably would take an hour to do it. CD drive and everything else, right? Yep. And then you take that, you might drop in a FedEx envelope, or somebody might be going to the town where the operator was located and be like, hey, can you drop this by the office? Yeah. And then you were trying to put some stuff on servers, which there wasn't necessarily enough room for it, to transfer the data. And I remember in probably So we shut down Frac, I think, in 16, sold in 17. I was one of the last remaining guys from Frac that was stayed at Weatherford. And I remember fielding phone calls from, past operators like, hey, do you have any data from this well that y'all fracked for us like 5 years ago? And let me look and see. I'll try to find something.
Yep.
And typically all I could find was some invoices and chemical usage sheets. There was nothing really about the treatment.
Yep.
And so I'd get on the phone and be like, man, I can't really find anything. Y'all don't have any of the files?
Yep.
And like, well, they were probably on a thumb drive and they got left in a desk drawer somewhere. And we've had a lot of turnover because it was during the downturn.
Yep.
We don't know where they went.
Yep.
And so there was a lot of companies who did not have files for wells that they had fracked. We could figure out the chemicals pumped, which is great for regulatory.
Yeah.
But to actually see what their treatment schedule was, I did an audit for a company and I had to sign off all kinds of paperwork, NDAs, but they had to grant me access to a whole bunch of email boxes for people who were no longer employed.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to sort through, I guarantee you, I sorted through probably 70 to 100,000 emails looking for certain things to facilitate this audit. I think it was about a $3 or $4 million audit.
Wow.
And the operator was lacking the same information. So we were basically in a room just going back and forth like, okay, I can't prove this, but I found an email where they talked about changing a price or they talked about changing this design because you say you were only supposed to pump 300 and we, 1,000 pounds and we pumped 400, but I found an email that kind of talks a little bit about it.
Yep.
And so we'd be like, okay, well, let's toss that claim out, move on to the next one.
Tell me about this audit process.
Yeah. So, it was an audit over invoices and, did we overcharge for certain things? Did we not do what we had, contractually stated? And a lot of these times, you have a contract, you have pricing in place and everything else. And especially during a busy time, you may have to supplement whether it's one chemical for one or a proppant type for another, or there's changes that the operator may make.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes those, as we know, a lot of people were, utilize text as a means of communication or a phone call.
Yep.
And it may not have been documented. And so this particular audit was, several $1 million. And, it got dropped in my lap because I was one of the last remaining frac guys that had any frac knowledge. And so, I got access to all these emails and I'm just doing searches and everything else and going through basically each well file it was like it was an audit that covered like 4 years worth of work.
Yep.
And, it was back and forth because what I found out was the operator didn't even have some of the data.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have some of the data. And I was like, well, this is a pretty significant disconnect because unless somebody was working at the company at that particular point in time and had those files, they were lost.
Yeah.
And, they were doing the same exercise on their end, going through past emails, trying to find it.
Yep.
And so there was just this kind of lack of data that was there. So where that also comes to play in is, they couldn't reference those past wells as to check and see what they did on them if they were going to develop adjacent acreage.
Yeah.
To see, do they even match up from a production, is what they treated them back then, was it a good path forward or are they starting from scratch?
Well, and it seems like, I guess, not being able to even keep track of that historic data, it seems like in a way you're throwing out this incredibly valuable asset because, as you said, if there's another well nearby, you can utilize what you know about that particular well, what that particular job, when you do something over here. So it gives you a whole bunch of information as to what you can be doing with it. Has there been maybe a change in how data and maybe operators have been looking at this, or has it always been the goal to try to capture as much data as possible and make that always available?
I think that was always the goal, but there was just limitations.
Yeah.
And completions especially.
Yeah.
Right. And, like I said, all the stage reports, all the files that were pertaining to the treatment and everything else were, they were just stored, we thought we were high tech when we got thumb drives. Like especially the big ones that you could have multiple files on.
Yep.
But again, those were just, temporary basically. And then you had, as technologies evolved, you didn't have they were all on-prem servers and there was limited space sometimes to try to put these big files in. So they didn't necessarily always get uploaded.
Yeah.
And where it comes into play for future state, especially as operators are looking to maybe divest an asset, sell it, I've had people tell me that having all this data makes it much more valuable when they go to sell as opposed to what they had before. So when you had all this kind of like just incomplete data, you couldn't really show them how you treated the well.
Yep.
And they go to sell, they'd be like, okay, well, we know the production. Okay, cool. But when you have all this extra data that goes with it, you have all the past history. It's like, would you buy a car if you had zero clue what anybody had done to it?
Yep.
You might, but is it going to be more valuable? You're going to pay more money for it if you know all the maintenance history of the car, right?
Well, how about other customers that, because the number of clients have been using SmartPAD for a number of years, have they been going into other wells that maybe that they have done something to in the past and are looking at, oh, maybe there's an opportunity to do something with it in the future or now?
I don't know a specific use case. I do know that some of our customers are getting a little bit more innovative in how they use it.
Yeah.
They're even starting to bring in some ChatGPT type stuff and reviewing some of the data that way and just toying with some other ways because now they've got these massive data sets.
Yep.
And before, I've equated it before of you can't, if you were to jump on a plane and they flip it on autopilot, but you knew that everything was assumed or substantial parts of the data was assumed.
Yeah.
And I use this analogy because my dad was an airline pilot.
Yeah.
If they're assuming altitude
Yep.
and they're assuming fuel consumption and they're assuming something else, you're not going to feel very safe, right?
No, not at all.
And so it's the same thing when they're trying to go and evaluate how they're going to do the next set of wells. If they can't look back a year prior and get some actual like quality, unassumed data, then it makes really relying upon those assumptions kind of half-assed.
You don't want to trust it.
Yeah, you trust it to a point, and then you're like, okay, it's maybe good or maybe bad, but we'll just go with it. And it's dependent upon your risk if you want to roll the dice on that.
Yeah. But I guess that's what it's been like, I guess, for years. So I guess people have been used to working a certain way. But this kind of creates a level of transparency and visibility, though, that the industry probably has not seen in completions.
Yeah. And, we've always kind of been in an industry a little bit of, well, we've always done it this way.
Yeah.
And, I remember this was probably two and a half years ago. We were working with one of our clients over some SOPs that were put in place on a procedure on location that were by the service company. And I'd asked to be in the meeting just to explain some of the times that we were seeing, walk through why they wanted to change this one particular process. And the guy's response was, well, this is the way we've always done it. Mm-hmm. And my client was like, well, that's not what I want to hear.
Yeah.
Like, just because you've always done it way it's not that way anymore. When we've got data to back up why we want to do something.
Yep.
And then we dove in a little bit further. We were like, well, who wrote this? And he was like, well, he doesn't work here anymore. Well, when was it written? Like 12 years ago. And it's like, well, shit, we've evolved as an industry and there's so many new things that are happening.
Yep.
That just because you did it one way for 30 years does not necessarily mean you were doing it the right way for 30 years.
Yeah.
And it was just the way that somebody said, here's how we're going to do it. And it's just not that way anymore.
So has the industry really changed to a point where things can't just be fine anymore, that they've got to be better?
I think so. I think when you look at all the pressures that are on oil and gas today,
yep,
and whether it's environmental, regulatory, all of that, having data and being able to actually use that to improve, whether it's fuel consumption, alternative fuels, things like that. There's a push in the industry to just be better.
Yeah.
And the old way of doing it, it's just not that way anymore.
Yeah.
And so there's more innovation and technology has hit oil and gas in a manner in the last probably 5 years that we didn't ever really anticipate back when I first started.
Yeah.
Because this is the way we've always done it. And you start asking those probing questions and then it's like, well, I don't know that's why. I don't know why we do it.
Yeah.
It's just the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
And I think people are tired of that response. And I think people are tired of that way of thinking.
Yeah. If you could go back into, working frac, but you actually had cold bore, like how would have made your life different or hopefully better if you had access to this tool when you were still working on frac jobs?
Oh, and that was one of the main things that kind of like when Brett started talking in our interview and he pulled up SmartPAD and I was looking at it and I think I may have even said, holy fuck, this is awesome.
Yeah.
You're going to have to bleep that.
Yep.
But it was because I was thinking back then and a lot of what I did, very manual. Like we were trying to do some, whether it's predictive maintenance or pad moves and stuff like that. And so one of the things I always pushed, like I had field soups out in the field, and you're only as good as your field soup or your service supervisors. And so they would give me feedback, and we would anticipate how we were going to make sure that we had enough CDL drivers, commercial drivers, to move the equipment to the next pad. Being able to have, if I had access to these screens, I would honestly would have had, big TVs mounted in my office and in dispatch where you could see pad progress, see, how many stages are left, see, in real time, how many pumping hours did we have yesterday and things like that. Because if I started noticing that we were shut down for pumps, then I would anticipate that problem immediately and dispatch additional equipment and bring back the pumps that were struggling into the maintenance shop to get looked at. And making sure that every time I had to pump that I was taking full advantage of it, and that would limit the MPT. The other is contract, the invoice reconciliation. Would be much smoother. We would have those done ASAP. And so, it would be a lot of logistics and a lot on the service side, getting those tools in the right hands, and then getting updates daily from my teams of what we're doing to fix these problems. Because it would be not just me that would be looking at it. I would have the ability to have everybody in the shop or in dispatch and the managers looking at it as well to start mitigating those issues as they come up instead of letting them become big issues. And so having it from a service perspective, having all that information and seeing, wireline's taking a little bit longer. Are we anticipating that? Are we doing this on location? Are we taking advantage of when they're down to rehead? Are we taking advantage of this? And it's exactly kind of how we talked about the operator and how they're trying to get their day-to-day decisions very similar from person to person. You have the same issue when you're running frac crews. You've got differing personalities in different positions. Some are more laid back that, they're like, oh, I think it'll be all right. We've got 4 days left. The pumps will make it. Then you've got others who are like, I want to get on it. And make sure that when we finish this, we finish strong. And then when we make that pad move, whether it was in 24, 36, 48 hours, that we start as strong as we finished. And being able to monitor that and making sure that when you rig up, that you're productive right from the get-go, instead of that. A lot of times you see like a slow increase back to productivity from where you finished. And so it would be trying to really correct those windows right there and making sure that you have the right equipment, the right people out there.
Hey, Lee, if people want to find out more information or they want to get in touch with you, what's really the best way to get a conversation going?
LinkedIn, give me a call. All my contact info is on LinkedIn, email, any way.